It looks like the baby wants to say something.
My 8-year-old niece, Betty said, glancing at John's face.
What? What are you talking about? Baby can't talk.
My eldest son, John, laughed off what he thought was just child's babble, dismissing Betty's words. Sandra and I both gasped and turned to look at Betty. My grandson, Joseph, blinked his big eyes several times and looked up at Sandra and me with a face that seemed to say he had something to tell.
It's not a lie. I can hear this child's voice.
Endeared by John's ridicule, Betty stares at him with teary eyes, as if it is her mission to convey the baby's words. Jennifer watched this in astonishment.
How then what is he saying? I'll listen just this once.
John looked down at Betty. It's certainly not the kind of gaze he would give to a small child. I held my breath as Betty spoke. My name is Michelle White. I am currently 50 years old, living with Kevin, a businessman, and our dog, Mook. Up until 7 years ago, our eldest son, John, lived with us along with our pet. But after graduating from community college, he started working at a factory and moved out on his own. John has always been rebellious, often not listening to us. No matter how much my strict husband, Kevin, warned him, he wouldn't listen and ended up in the care of the police on several occasions. Every time, Kevin and I had to apologize repeatedly and lecture John sternly. But for John, causing trouble for others and getting cautioned by the police didn't seem to bother him, as he repeatedly got into similar mishaps. As a child, he was the leader of the local kids, bossing around his elementary school friend. That was still cute to think about it right now. As he grew older, his delinquency escalated, and it reached a point where he caused injuries and troubles to others, and we as his parents felt helpless. Before graduating from community college, we even considered sending him to a rehabilitation center. However, as soon as he graduated, he landed a job at a decent company, and we were relieved to see him turning into a respectable adult. As a working adult, perhaps due to being busy or changing his ways, the police no longer called us about him. Living alone, John seemed to have changed, managing household matters by himself. Finally, after years of challenging parenting, Kevin and I could relax and appreciate each other's hard work. 2 years ago, John introduced us to a woman that he wants to marry. At that time, John was only 25. Though young for marriage by social standards, considering his troubled youth, we were overjoyed to hear that he could actually settle down.
This one is my fiancée, Jennifer. I met her in town.
Though calling his soon-to-be wife this one bothered me, John has always been rough-spoken, so I didn't point it out.
Nice to meet you. I'm Jennifer.
The woman John brought, Jennifer, was beautiful and slender, with a modest demeanor, stepping back a step behind John, very much the picture of a wife. I'm John's mother. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Jennifer bowed slightly with shyness. It was a mystery why this young lady fell for John, but perhaps he had a charming side that he didn't show us.
We're planning to register our marriage next month.
John reported casually, but his usual tone was no concern to Kevin and me. If the two of them had decided together, there was no need for us to intervene.
So, at work the other day,
John quickly moved on from his marriage announcement to ramble about recent happenings at work. Most of it was him boasting about how he had saved his workplace from a crisis or covered for a coworker's misdeeds. We half listened, but Jennifer attentively nodded along with John's stories. Indeed, a woman who listened so well could see why John would be charmed. Despite coming to announce his marriage, John spent the time talking mostly about himself, which was impressive of Jennifer not to be dismayed. In the end, John's marriage announcement was mostly him talking about what he wanted. While John was in the bathroom, I became concerned about Jennifer and asked how she was doing. "Are you doing okay, Jennifer?" He only ever thinks about himself.
No, I'm used to it. It's fine.
Jennifer seemed to be taking care not to worry me, shaking her head as if it were nothing. "Please always let me know if there's anything you need. We're family now."
Thank you.
Jennifer politely bowed her head, and I could see a faint trace of tears in her eyes, which surprised me.
Oh, sorry. It's just some dust.
Jennifer wiped the corner of her eye. She might be experiencing some pre-wedding jitters. I remember feeling overwhelmed when I first told my in-laws about our marriage. That day, I nostalgically watched Jennifer leave our house. John is lucky to have such a wife. I can finally feel relieved.
Yeah, it's been a long journey, but we've both done well.
Kevin and I congratulated each other on raising our son, and that night, we enjoyed some fine wine. We got drunker than usual and went to bed early. 2 years have passed since John married Jennifer, and earlier this year, they had a boy. His name is Joseph, and from the photos, he seems to take after Jennifer with his robust features. We only know that from the photos, because neither Kevin nor I have met Joseph yet. Whenever I ask John to let us meet Joseph, he responds, "We've been really busy," or "Jennifer would prefer not to." Certainly, I had hesitated initially after the birth, not wanting to burden Jennifer, but months had passed without any sign from John, so Kevin and I finally lost our patience and decided to visit their home secretly. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. "Hello there." Jennifer and John lived in a rented apartment about 40 minutes away by car in a rural area from our house. When I rang the doorbell, Jennifer opened the door.
Michelle, Kevin, what brings you here?
Seeing us after a long time, Jennifer seemed somewhat frightened. She looked thinner than before. Or perhaps more appropriately, she looked worn out. "Sorry for dropping in," and announced. "We just really wanted to see Joseph's face. We couldn't wait any longer. Is now a good time?"
Yes, please, come in.
Although I asked tentatively, thinking it might be a busy time, Jennifer let us in without hesitation. As soon as we entered, the smell of cigarette smoke hit my nose. Kevin frowned. I was shocked too, thinking cigarette smoke in a house with a baby. However, we did not mention it and proceeded to the back of the house. Finding Joseph sleeping in his crib in the living room, Kevin and I smiled. We gently touched his little hand, careful not to wake him, and he twitched but continued sleeping. "He's adorable."
Thank you.
A slight smile appeared on Jennifer's tired face. "Is John not here today?"
Yes, he's out with friends today.
"Oh, leaving you and Joseph alone."
It's usual for us.
"It's usual. Is he always going out when he has a day off?" "Is John taking part in parenting properly? I smelled cigarette smoke earlier. Is he smoking?"
Well,
Jennifer did not reply to this. She just nodded, her expression confirming my suspicions. and I felt deeply saddened. That's terrible of him. I'll have a word with him and tell him to be more supportive.
Please don't.
Her clear rejection caught me by surprise. I thought about scolding John as Jennifer seemed exhausted from childcare and household duties, but perhaps she saw it as meddling.
Oh, no. I appreciate your concern, but I don't want him to think I've been complaining about him.
Well, Jennifer thinks that she would be blamed if I complained to John about him. But doesn't that make it tough for you, Jennifer?
I'm okay. Please don't say anything to him.
With Jennifer insisting so, neither Kevin nor I could say anything more. All right, but please, feel free to talk to us if you need anything. We're here to help.
Thank you.
I had heard that Jennifer grew up in a single mother household and that her mother was currently hospitalized due to illness. So, aside from John, Kevin and I were the only family she could rely on. We wanted to help her ease her burdens in any way we could. During our conversation, Jennifer sporadically shared more about John's sloppy lifestyle and his awful behavior towards her, which pained us to hear. We hadn't known that John was treating Jennifer so poorly while we hadn't seen them. Although Jennifer had refused, if John continued his terrible behavior, we secretly resolved to reprimand him without hesitation. A week after our visit, on a Saturday when Kevin had to work, my sister, Sandra, and my 8-year-old niece, Betty, came to visit. Sandra and I have always been close, and even as adults, we often spent time together. It had been half a year since I last saw her. When Sandra and Betty arrived, they first petted our dog, Milk. Betty, who doesn't usually interact with dogs, looked curiously at Milk. When Sandra said, "Isn't he cute?" Betty solemnly nodded. Then I served tea for Sandra and Betty, and we caught up on each other's lives. Unlike me, a full-time housewife, Sandra worked part-time and shared complaints about her boss. I guess this is the only time she can relieve stress. I was listening to Sandra's talk, nodding appropriately. During our conversation, Betty, who had been playing with Milk, suddenly turned to us and stared with her big eyes. "What's wrong, Betty?" I asked, and Betty began,
Milk says, "Thank you for always taking care of me. But he also says he'd like more frequent baths. Not just once a month, but maybe once a week."
Yeah. Betty's sudden talk of Milk's feelings confused me. Looking at Sandra, well, she rolled her eyes. It's common for young kids to pretend to talk with animals, but Betty mentioning specific details about the shampoo frequency was unexpected. And indeed, the frequency of once a month was accurate. I didn't want to bathe him more often, but I've been too busy lately. Betty, did Milk tell you that just now?
Yes. He looked like he wanted to talk, so I asked him.
At first, I thought Betty was either lying or fantasizing. However, I was surprised when Sandra said, actually, things like this happen to her often.
The other day, despite the weather forecast predicting clear skies, she insisted a storm was coming and that we should stay home. We did because we had no plans anyway. And sure enough, the weather turned violent. Signs were blown about outside. It was good we stayed in.
That's incredible.
There's more. She once found the car keys I had lost immediately. And like now, she sometimes talks to dogs during walks. No one believes it, but I've realized this child has some mysterious ability.
Samra said that and stroked Betty's head. If what Samra says is true, I also think Betty has some strange power. It's unbelievable, but having witnessed that power just now, I had no choice but to believe it. After speaking on behalf of the feelings of our dog Milk, Betty seemed relieved and began playing with Milk normally again.
How about you? How have you been lately?
As I glanced at Betty, Samra's question reminded me of last week's events. Actually, I met Joseph for the first time the other day. I told Samra everything I had seen at John's house. How John had gone out alone, leaving Jennifer and baby at home on Sunday, his smoking habit, and his intimidating attitude towards Jennifer. With every story I told, I could see Samra's eyebrows furrowing more and more.
That's terrible. John has always been a handful since he was young, but I thought he had improved recently.
Yes, but it seems I was mistaken. It's just too bad for Jennifer.
Yeah, I'm worried too. If it's okay, why don't we visit Jennifer together next time? Maybe we can help her in some way, of course, after giving her prior notice.
Understood. I'll ask her about it. The following weekend, Sandra, Betty, and I visited John's family again. When I contacted Jennifer beforehand, I found out that John had gone out again, which was just as well. But still, I wasn't pleased that John regularly left the house empty on his days off. Hello, Jennifer. Sorry for coming again.
No, it's just the two of us, so it's always okay.
Hello.
It had been about 2 years since Samra and Betty had met Jennifer, since the last time we all met with each other's families. Betty bowed her head slightly. Then she rushed over to the bed where the baby was lying and stroked his head. It seems she likes babies. While watching Betty, we sat down at the dining table. Jennifer seemed even more worn out from childcare and housework than before. Sandra also frowned at this, sending a sympathetic look her way. How has John been since then?
No change. He yells at me to stay home whenever I try to go out. And he himself drinks and smokes as he pleases. If I say anything back, he says, "Who do you think is earning the bread for you guys?"
Jennifer tearfully described her daily life. Sandra handed her a hand towel. Are you okay? It's unbelievable. I really feel like getting back at him. I was furious at John's awful attitude.
It would be great if we could get something on him, something that could even involve the police.
Samra muttered quietly. Hearing that, Jennifer gasped.
It's not a police matter, but recently, debt collectors have come asking for money. It was during a time John was not home, so I told them they must be mistaken, but they said, "This is John White's house, isn't it?"
What? That happened? I hate to ask, but Jennifer, do you have any debts?
No, I don't know about any debts. We're just renting here, and there's no mortgage.
Sandra and I looked at each other. What could this mean? Is John racking up debts without Jennifer knowing and unable to pay them back? As we were swirling with questions and searching for the right words to say.
Today was another terrible loss.
The sound of the front door being roughly opened and John's voice could be heard. Everyone's expression froze.
What? Why is Mom here?
John glared at me, reminding me of his rebellious and delinquent days. Sorry for barging in, but I was worried about Jennifer. John was startled to find not only me, but also his aunt and cousin here. But realizing it was just family, he seemed relieved and ordered Jennifer, "Give me a drink." Jennifer quickly headed to the kitchen.
There's no more alcohol left.
What? I don't care about that. It's the wife's job to keep it stocked.
Sorry.
In front of her arrogantly behaving husband, who acted like a king, Jennifer shrank and hunched her shoulders. I couldn't help but yell, "John, knock it off." But John didn't even glance at me and just glared at Jennifer. As I was looking for some way to discipline John, Joseph started crying loudly in his crib. Jennifer suddenly looked up and tried to head towards Joseph, but John glared at her so fiercely that she couldn't move from her spot. I looked at Sandra and we talked with her eyes to see if there was a better way. That was then. Betty, who was watching Joseph, spoke up.
"Hey, the baby seems to have something to say."
She said this while glancing at John's face.
What? Don't be silly. Baby can't talk.
John probably thought it was a child's joke and laughed at what Betty said. However, both Sandra and I looked at Betty's face. Joseph blinked his big eyes several times and looked up at me and Sandra as if he had something to say.
"It's not a lie. I can hear this child's voice."
Endeared by John's ridicule, Betty stares at him with teary eyes, as if it is her mission to convey the baby's words. Jennifer watched this in astonishment.
How then what is he saying? I'll listen just this once.
John looked down at Betty. It's certainly not the kind of gaze he would give to a small child. I held my breath as Betty spoke.
"He says, Daddy is up to no good. Mommy, don't be fooled."
At Betty's words, John flinched for a moment. Jennifer's eyes widened in shock. Sandra and I quickly realized that Betty was trying to use her mysterious power. "What do you mean, Betty?" I urged Betty to explain further. Betty, she paused, then and spoke again.
"Daddy keeps secrets in a notebook he always hides behind the bookshelf. And I love Mommy. Daddy is scary, he's crying."
Then Betty looked around the room and toddled over to the bookshelf at the end of the living room. Jennifer listened to Betty's words, trembling. Betty pulled out about 3 books from the shelf and seemed to discover a small notebook behind them, which she handed to Sandra.
"Here it is."
Looking at the small notebook Betty had found, John's face turned pale. Sandra, watching the faces of both John and Jennifer, opened the notebook.
It's a life insurance policy. Let's see, the insured is Jennifer, and John is the beneficiary. There's even the contract attached.
Now it was Jennifer's turn to look pale, and I took the notebook from Sandra to see for myself. Just as Sandra had said, it contained a life insurance policy for over $100,000 on Jennifer and the contract, which made me doubt my eyes. John, what is this all about? Although John had often gotten into trouble before, I had never thought he would do something so cruel to his own wife. I glared at John. I wanted to ask about this life insurance right away.
Come on, I'm out of money. And isn't it normal to take out life insurance? It's not like I was planning to do anything to Jennifer.
John rattled off excuses as if he were justifying himself. The fact that he didn't have money was confirmed by the story of the debt he heard from Jennifer. It's pretty clear what he's been spending his earnings on without even asking. John goes out every day, leaving Jennifer and Joseph behind. He must have squandered the money on frivolous entertainment. Look, isn't insurance usually something you take out on your own? It's weird to sign up for your life insurance behind her back and then play dumb about it. Faced with my logic, John stumbled over his words. Then, as if to drive the point home, Betty spoke up again.
The baby told me. He said Daddy was talking to himself about stealing money from his company and getting fired. And that he's planning to do something bad to Mommy to get some money.
What?
I exclaimed in response to Betty's words. Fired from his company. Then what has he been doing all this time during the weekdays? Looking over, I saw that Jennifer was also staring at him in disbelief.
What are you talking about? There's no proof.
John spat back at Betty. I stepped in front of Betty, unleashing all my built-up anger. Proof. Betty just told you everything as it is. She can understand the baby's words. It's not just that. Finding this notebook wasn't a coincidence either. So what Betty is saying is true. You've seen it for yourself now. The life insurance contract was right there. Stop your nonsense and apologize to Jennifer. Furious like never before, I scolded John. Knowing that my own son was plotting something terrible against Jennifer pained my heart. He had boasted before about taking the blame for a subordinate's misconduct at work, but it turned out he was the one who had actually caused the trouble. As his mother, it's too shameful to bear.
What the heck?
John grimaced in frustration, scratching his head. But it was all his own doing. His actions had come back to haunt him, and no one felt sympathy for him. Perhaps emboldened by my scolding, Jennifer finally spoke up.
I had no idea you were capable of something this low. I want nothing to do with you anymore. Pay off your debts yourself. Goodbye.
With that, she grabbed the baby and stormed out of the house. We watched in stunned silence. As Jennifer left, John muttered, "This is ridiculous." But after being thoroughly scolded by Samra and me, he finally slumped his shoulders in defeat. It was unfortunate that Jennifer had left, but it was good that his misdeeds were exposed. Looking at Betty, who seemed satisfied having said all she wanted to say, she stretched and exclaimed, "I'm hungry. Shall we go get something to eat? Well, we'll be taking our leave now." Sandra, Betty, and I left John's house. It wouldn't be surprising if debt collectors showed up at this house at any time. Just like Jennifer, I don't want to come to this house anymore.
Why is this happening?
John was still ranting as we closed the front door, but we ignored his pathetic cries and left the apartment. A few days later, concerned about Jennifer, I contacted her.
I'm sorry for worrying you. I've gone back to my grandmother's house. Please come and see Joseph anytime.
I was relieved to hear she was safe. Jennifer immediately sent divorce papers to the John. Initially, he refused to agree to the divorce, but he finally caved after she insisted that she would not let him see the child unless they divorced. She's currently job searching at her grandparents' house while her mother is in the hospital. She plans to put the baby in daycare soon. As for John, his days have turned into hell, working daily part-time jobs to pay off his debts. At first, he begged Kevin for money, but upon hearing the situation, he exploded in anger, telling him, "Don't ever come back to our house." Thanks to that, John no longer asks us for help. I don't feel sorry for him. After all, he brought this on himself. As for me, I occasionally visit Jennifer's grandparents' house, just like she mentioned, to play with Joseph. Despite the tough times Jennifer endured because of John, she and her family welcome us with open arms, including Samra and Betty, without showing any displeasure.
Betty, do you understand what Joseph just said?
Yes. He said he's happy to be playing with Mom and Grandma.
Really? That's wonderful.
Jennifer was just oppressed by John. In reality, she's a warm, polite, and wonderful person. That's why she still treats us all equally and without any reservations. To me, that's more than enough.